Hey, it's Adam. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Today I had the pleasure of sitting for a late morning tea session with Olivia Pepper. She's an anarchist mystic, a thorn in the side of the patriarchy, a herald of utopia, and a younger, hotter, more feminist Alejandro Jodorowsky. She's a friend I met a few years ago through my partner Pamela, and we spoke of time, masculinity, generation apocalypse, and technologically induced apathy. We imbibed White Two Tea's Waffles, which is a ripe pu'er harvested and processed in 2017, which I thought was befitting for the time of day and the gravity of our discussion. Here's Olivia.
Podcasts, there are podcasts about cinema, which is also very funny to me because it reminds me of that quote, which is, what is the quote? It ends with like dancing about architecture, talking about like mixing mediums. And so, yeah, just talking about cinema on the radio or on a podcast is a pretty funny experience.
Yeah.
But we had this like end of the year roundup of like all of our favorite films of the year. And I would get to talk about my top 5, and that was always
What do you remember from a particular year, your top 5?
Well, I do remember, I don't know if I can remember all 5, but I remember when I felt like 1999 was a great year in films. And I remember us all talking about a bunch of different movies that came out that year. American Beauty came out that year.
Right.
We had a big conversation about that, and so did Magnolia.
Right.
And lots of conversation about that. There were a couple of other films that came out that year that were really impactful as well. I'm trying to remember.
It's funny to think 20 years ago is like, in a way, it's so vivid, but it's also such a blur.
Oh, yeah. That's weird, actually. I hadn't even thought that it was 20 years ago, but it totally is.
Mm-hmm.
1999. I remember Y2K also. We were on a radio show. I wish I had a recording of this because maybe it exists somewhere. It's probably just genius to listen to these like kind of goofy art kids in Eugene, Oregon, talking about what's going to happen at Y2K. Because regrettably, I admit that I had some outsized expectations of that particular event.
I feel like we all, don't we all in a way? Like, not, what's the right way of, I have like 14 responses to that. But no, in the sense of like, people want, that's like, because of the media, this is just a big hypothesis at this point, but like because of like what we grew up watching or playing or consuming in terms of media, when you think about something like Y2K, like it could be this or it could be that, and there's almost this desire to want it to be like really crazy or like something in a movie, right?
Yeah. Oh, I wanted it to be like the end of the world. I went up on a hillside with some friends and like waited to watch the power grid fail.
Right.
And then we were like, oh. There was just like a lot of hollering, and then and I remember I was like scared. I was afraid of what was going to happen. I guess I turned 17 that year, and so I was only like a couple months over turning 17, and I felt like I was nervous that like everything was going to collapse.
Yeah.
And like we were going to be in some kind of like Mad Max reality, and I was never going to be like a normal 18-year-old or something, like I was just like, my life is going to be over before it even starts, and like cars won't work anymore.
Right. Banks won't work and all that stuff.
Yeah. I didn't know how to drive at that time, and I remember just being like, no, I'm never going to learn. And then, sure enough, now I drive a car and my phone works fine. My phone works better than I ever imagined a phone working in 1999.
Had we thought about our Nokias back then,
Whew,
and what would happen today?
Yep.
It's also now that you brought up like these timelines, it's really remarkable to think back between 99 and '01, just how much, and then after '01, like what that actual like chaos like, turned into, like how that was felt, you know, on a societal level,
Yeah.
but also like an interpersonal level.
Yeah, it's true. It's so funny how, yeah, 2001, there was such a like zeitgeist around that. I mean, not just around like 9/11, but just, I guess, I mean, maybe it's just the association with, and now we're referencing cinema again, but 2001 was always such a big deal with like all the cinephiles that I was living amongst.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, with anything like that, I think like with 1984 and with 2001, there are like these iconic art pieces that you then have sort of a comparative expectation around. When you get to that time, you're like, okay, let's see how it is. It smells so good.
It's like molassesy.
Yeah. It kind of has like a, yeah, it's like a hay quality too, like very like robust, sort of like countryside smell. Like it. Smells like a horse barn in a really good way.
Horse barn. I like that.
Yeah, it's when like I just think of like, you know, horses for treats, they like carrots and apples. And horses love brown sugar. You have to like be very careful about it. We used to occasionally give little brown sugar lumps.
Like cubes, right?
And that's kind of reminds me of that. But yeah, 2001 was such a weird year because it was like, I don't know. I feel like it already had like had an expectation around it on some kind of cultural level. And then we just had huge events, global events.
But like beyond events, it was so palpable to feel like the way, like how everyone's way of ways of thinking had like shifted remarkably.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, we're both at a similar age. We're like both around 18, 17, 18, 19. It was. I'm curious, like how many other people in our age bracket who aged out of high school at that time. It's like we're going into the world, and then suddenly the world has this, sort of crisis of consciousness.
Yeah.
It I think looking back now, it's like to me it was like it's no surprise that I like didn't pursue anything really, any sort of upper academic or like scholastic. I kept going for like human experiences, but like tangible experiences. Like I just pursued music after like trying to do 2 years at like SMC or something.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe 10 years ago or so, I was having this conversation with some friends in Portland. And I remember this conversation at that time. I think the terminology of millennials was just emerging. And there was this big dialogue about whether me and my friends who are around this age, now in our mid-30s, then in our mid-20s, whether we belonged with millennials or Generation X. And that's still something that people occasionally, like, I think, discuss. But
Sure.
At the time, I was like, no, we have our own little segment. And I don't necessarily, like, wasn't super attached to this at that time. Maybe I'm not super attached to it now. But I remember saying that I felt like we were the apocalypse generation because we had been born somewhere around 1984. We had come of age right during Y2K, and then our 30th birthdays would be around 2012, like the end of the world. Like, it's just, we're consistently facing down the end of the world all the time for ourselves. And like, you can't go 5 years without this generation feeling like the world is ending for us. And I still think that that's really true.
That's really, I mean, the timeline is so good.
Yeah.
I hadn't realized that until you mentioned that. It's like, not, I mean, and as I, that's amazing. I have to like sit with that for a second. As I am understanding and sort of like, seeking, sort of like a translation for, I guess different kinds of, astrologies or macro level sort of cosmology that's going on, like, just, in sort of in like an everyday sense, but also like how I can help better understand myself. What you just said was hilarious for me because it just echoed in my ears. um you know what, I forgot his name, but there's a TCM practitioner and astrologer who he's in Portland. God, is his name George? I don't know right now. I think I need to drink more tea. But he was talking about the year of the Earth Pig, and I myself am a water pig, and I was always like, I'd like to understand what that means. And I was reading a piece that he put out about this year's astrology from that school of thought, and then he started talking about the water pig and how it relates to the earth pig. And water, like the sort of the tone of water pig is just like dissolution, just basically like, I don't want to say somewhere around death, but something like there's some relationship there, some unique relationship there. I mean, I suppose it's more melodramatic, but you saying that was like just really hilarious to hear like that timeline and like, oh, that's right. That is kind of how I look back and relate to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny thing to like live your whole life thinking like it's gonna maybe be over like soon. It's very like, yeah, very odd, sort of like doom quality.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a strength. I end up like, or I've decided that it's a strength.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it can be. It can be very like, I mean, in some ways we're like the quintessential sort of like existentialist generation because we just have existentialism like forced upon us.
Yeah.
I like to think that maybe the existentialist philosophers would be kind of proud of those of us who are like continuing to go on in the face of being told all the time that like our world is ending.
Yeah. I mean, and hilarious to also think about like as I guess a diehard existentialist, but more like a more like a self reflection glutton, I suppose, and like having experienced nature or myself or others through this medium of tea is now hilariously amplified in this conversation, like recorded conversation template. I don't even know what to call it, but how it kind of all sort of all related. and when I think about, it's funny, you're the seventh person I am speaking to, and there's no form, there's no container, sometimes I think, oh, I want to talk to you because I want to talk to you about like parenthood, technology, and I sometimes I think, I've maybe done that with 2 or 3 of my guests. And yet there's this bigger internal conversation of like, I don't want to think of myself as being that prepared or that sort of like focused. It's almost like my from what I understand about like my Virgo rising qualities are actually like put on mute in this sort of a container, because I'm not trying to perfect or like do anything perfect in this regard, which feels really healing to me.
Yeah.
And it's like when I actually think about why am I doing this, because I want to hear stories, and to hear stories over a cup of tea or like rounds of tea is so timeless. It's like that's what needs to be maintained, if anything. And the fact that other people can hear a story or hear these stories, it may be a benefit. And so there isn't like a really like altruistic reason, but it's just.
No, that's great. I feel like that's also something that like tea, or at least the process of tea, has given me in my life also. And that I have Virgo Sun and Virgo Venus. So I feel this kind of, this kind of constant pressure to like get it right a lot, or like have it planned, have it organized, have everything step by step so that I know what to expect. But I feel like tea and really anything that like it energetically, I guess, touches, which would include this like recording and this interaction. I feel like tea creates a container in which all sorts of conversations can happen. But the precision, the like our love of maybe order, discipline, routine, structure, that can go into the preparation of it, like just into the objects and the heating of the water and the simple actions that go along with it. And then from there, everything else can kind of unfold in the container and just like allows things to take place, which I think is very, very lovely and very dynamic.
It's also nice to think of it in terms of like a multi-dimensional arrangement, or like almost like a symphony, right? You have like certain sets of instruments that are playing within a certain register. Or there's rhythm, there's reeds and strings. There's a certain, as you pointed out, there's a really like, it could be as rigid as you want, but there's an order on this level.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like a groundedness here. At least that's what I'm cultivating. And then there's like the etheric level here. You know, like where the conversation and the mind is. And there's a unique structure there. It's like, I don't know how. I never quite visualized it, but to keep going to that, to keep sort of like repeating that, not to repeat it like I wanted to do it the same way all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's another beautiful thing about, there's work and there's things that we do on a daily basis or regular basis. And then there's even this that I do as best as I can on a daily basis. And I never think about doing it the same way twice.
Mm-hmm.
I maybe bring the same tea over and over again on different days, but setup, positioning, structure, all that kind of stuff. It's funny to think of it like consciously or subconsciously. What's actually who has the upper, not the upper hand, but just the interplay between both.
It's funny that we're talking about Virgo qualities relating to tea and like habits, because traditionally Virgo is the natural ruler of the 6th house, and I've just been researching the 6th house a lot in my studies and feeling like it's kind of misunderstood. I think, there's a lot of things about astrology that are misunderstood, but I think the 6th house kind of gets it gets overlooked, I think, in a lot of people's assessments of what they're working on, because it tends to rule. People say like, oh, it rules what you do every day. It rules your habits and routines and work style, which is true. But I think that like, since I'm learning medical astrology, one of the things that I look for things in the 6th house a lot, because it also has to do with like sort of daily health. So like what the condition is of your health.
Cool.
Like, so, if somebody's like waking up coughing every morning, like I'll look for indicators in the 6th, because that's like an everyday phenomenon that's just kind of happening on background. And that's something that like Virgo is associated with, because that's our traditional place. So I think about tea as being something that like you do every day, and it's just like a part of your routine, part of your like habit process. And I just think about kind of the long-term idea of, I guess, perfecting daily habits for like maximum serenity. I think about that a lot, just in terms of what we do every day that like affects us. It reminds me of this teaching that I got from a a Buddhist once, a monk who was staying at this intentional community that I was connected to when I was a kid in Oregon. And I remember he said, essentially, to like kind of sum this up, that it's really crucial that we deal with tiny annoyances that come up in our day-to-day lives. Like if you have a cupboard door that doesn't latch right,
Right.
and every day you have to like lift it slightly to get it to shut. Even if this is like this tiny thing, it's this tiny moment that annoys you in your morning, cumulatively it's like this, like it develops this background noise of like this horrifying stress of this stupid door that doesn't shut. Like it can just kind of become a monster in
Right.
itself.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like for some reason that's related to like Virgo psychology in a way of just like needing to like deal with a thing that's like constantly there so that it doesn't become some kind of outsized horror.
Or the ways that you know, the proverbial what's the really hokey thing? The nails on a chalkboard. Whatever versions of nails on a chalkboard come up for people. Right, or you know, or even it can even go on a more macro level, like I need to take my car in for that oil change, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, the little things that are just bumping around in there. Little bugs in Y2K that could take down the entire power grid.
Or like you know, every time I read about like there's this epic solar flare coming, it's like I wonder if that's gonna be the one. You know, and it's funny. The more the more I, and this has like also been accented into becoming a parent, but the more I relate, you know, to myself or to other people on this level, or the more I take time to like play an instrument or play a beat or something, or spend time in nature, that's like the more I think, all right, if whatever will hit the satellites or something, if the satellites go down and these fucking things stop working, I'm not going to lose my mind about it. I know it. I know I won't be like devastated if these things stop working. On the other hand, I will be like really seeking like connection with everyone, right? To me that, and this may just be totally subjective. I mean, I guess it's all subjective, but I feel like wouldn't people be looking for connection in those situations? You know, it seems like that may be an understated thing, but that may be my sort of optimist, you know, saying that out loud. But
I think people do look for connection in those situations. I think that like the microcosm sort of reflects the macrocosm in that state, and I think that we can look to the fact that I think fear keeps us like separate from each other a lot. So in situations where somebody is you know, ill and they're dying, for example, like there's a lot of kind of hesitation that people can have around that. They feel awkward about going to see someone in the hospital. You know, they feel like a sort of sense of fear about it. But when like death and tragedy is upon a person, they seek connection very actively. And I've seen that to be true in my life in a number of situations. You know, when a person is actually in a state of true crisis, not just feared crisis, they're very quick to like connect and bond and like reach out to people. It's necessary, you know. I think that it's like fear and anxiety that keep us from connecting. You know, I'm thinking of like a time when I saw someone who had been in a really bad bicycle accident and was pretty severely injured, and I was waiting with them and kind of doing pain coaching with them. And this was a stranger to me, somebody I didn't know. But while we waited for the EMTs, this person had like broken their ankle very, very severely and was in a lot of pain and wasn't able to move. And we just had a really strong, very natural human bond. And they were very clearly like looking for someone to bond with in the midst of this hubbub. You know, they're kind of like looking for eyes to catch theirs. And I was like, can I do this right now? Yes, I can. Like, I can just go sit on the curb and hold hands and make eye contact and be like, you're doing great. Just keep breathing. They're going to be here soon. I can hear the sirens. Just like, stay with me. You're doing good. You know, and kind of like put myself in that place. But it was a very, very strong human bond that happens. But I think if you consider like the like fear around doing that, the fear around sort of like showing up to that, I think that's what really like keeps us separated. So right now, when we live in this state of like global anxiety, we are all sort of like awkwardly trying not to make eye contact with each other,
which is convenient with these things too.
Yeah, they work for us.
Yeah.
You know, but once the proverbial shit hits the fan, I think we'll all be looking for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I guess people fall in line. People will hoard things or hide. Other people will be like, what can I give?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Some people will probably just be out dancing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
People will be like, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with this.
So when you walked in, you mentioned like the feeling of LA. There's a certain palpability to it. And as someone who is not based here, I'm curious to just like, you know, every time you come through here, like what's your take on LA?
Oh man. I love LA, and I have loved LA for many, many years. I think I've loved LA since before I moved here. I actually, you know, it's funny, I was thinking about this today. There's this series of books by Francesca Leah Block, the Dangerous Angels books. And they're like teeny bopper girl books. But they're also they were kind of, I can't say my introduction to magical realism, because I had read some magical realist poets. But they are like adolescent girl fantasies about Los Angeles. And there's like characters that are like demons and fairies and like all kinds of different things all existing in this sort of like urban wonderland. So I was reading those books when I was like 14 and 15, and they're about LA, and they are serious love songs to Los Angeles. There's all kinds of references to businesses that were like iconic here, and Sunset Boulevard and different things like that. So I think I developed this like fascination and love for Los Angeles. Another funny thing is I was just talking a couple days ago about how I think Los Angeles and Paris are actually remarkably similar in that, and this is a distillation of my thoughts on the matter, but I think that people who are not based in those cities develop far-fetched, outlandish ideas about what the cities are. And then when they arrive, they find that they are dirty and crowded, and that the true heart of the city is people of color working very hard, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with that.
Right.
But I love both of those cities essentially like for that reason. Like I love them for weird avant-garde art being made by like poor people who are addicted to drugs, and also for like very hardworking, diligent people of color maintaining the like weird homes of wealthy people, which I feel like is like this kind of Paris LA connection that I just connect to. But I've loved LA forever, and when I came here for the first time, which would have been, I mean, almost 20 years ago, I just fell in love with this city, and I think I've been in love with this city forever. I don't really maintain any illusion that I could live here full time. I've never tried it. I don't think I want to, although I get closer and closer to like having a place here sometimes.
Or like something a lily pad.
Yeah. I've been talking with a couple friends about getting essentially like an LA timeshare apartment. I have a really good friend, one of my first tarot apprentices, who works in the film industry and does sound for films. But the rest of the time, this person prefers to be out in nature, like hiking national parks and rock climbing. And so, maybe needs to be in LA for like 6 weeks and then gone for 8 weeks and then back for 6 or something. And then I have another friend who's a touring musician who wants to be based here, but is often gone.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about like just getting an apartment that's all of ours, that we just sort of like block out throughout the year and just share. But yeah, I love this place, and I think that like part of it is really loving the actual land, which I know that like there's certainly some people who are local to here who really have an affection for the land itself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not maybe the most usually high on people's list of reasons to love LA.
Sure.
But I do have a real deep affection for this like desert, ocean, canyons connection that's taking place. But also it's just, I feel like there's no other city like this in the world, and that's like very special to me. It's a place that's like unique unto itself. There's something that I say about it that sort of like I think annoys locals sometimes, but people from outside LA complain about LA's disingenuousness, or the fact that everybody's always kind of like hustling, or they're always acting like they're doing better than they are, or there's something going on there. And I've always been like an awkwardly sincere person. And but I'm also oddly guarded. Like I have this kind of odd duality. And one of my favorite things about coming to LA is that I can just be effusively sincere, and everyone here assumes that it's a put on and that I'm not really like that. So I can be myself, but people think I'm not being genuine. So I get this opportunity to like be myself without anybody getting too hung up on it. And it's very relaxing to me. I kind of like that people assume that I'm like not as open-hearted as I'm presenting, because no one else in LA is that open-hearted. That's like part of the culture, is to pretend to be more enthused than you are. But I just get to be like, yeah, this is me, but nobody's like getting too hung up on it. When I go to New York, people start trying to like protect me. They're like, you can't be like that all the time, man. Like you can't be all open with people. Like just like take it easy. Like stop it. My friend Alex Diamond, this New York artist who I collaborate with, he's like, you care too much about people. It's bad. Like you gotta like fucking put a lid on it, And out here, people are like, they think that I probably don't care, so nobody's really concerned, because it's like just a part of the vibe is to like, I don't know. It's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, and everybody's bubbles here are more robust. So they, yeah, I mean, yeah, because Alex, it sounded like something a New Yorker would say. And yet I've met some really open-hearted New Yorkers, but given the fact that most New Yorkers are shoulder to shoulder with everyone else, and riding subways and walking and living and working in like smaller spaces than here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of room for, I don't know, I've never really lived there. I maybe spent a total of a month there. Oddly enough, it was the month that we elected Barack Obama as president.
Oh, wow.
It was like Halloween through Election Day, like up until like Thanksgiving.
Wow.
It was unforgettable.
Yeah.
It was almost like the biggest New Year's party I'd ever seen.
That sounds, I can't even imagine what that must have felt like.
It was surreal. Yeah, it was totally surreal. And it's on the one hand, it's sort of kind of like fun to romanticize it looking back.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, it's like, yeah, it's weird to look at like periods of time as we today are like, politically a lot dirtier than we ever have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know if I can go there right now. In a weird way, and I'm aware that I'm saying this from a place of privilege. But it's weird to look back then and then like take stock and looking at right now. And on the one hand, it's like, I don't want to throw my words into like the daily cacophony, or the words and thoughts, or like spending energy like posting things or reposting things, which is even worse. But yeah, from the privileged place, it's like I kind of just want to wait to see like what's actually going to like uncover itself. But waiting is not a great. I don't know if it's a good strategy.
It's a weird thing, right? Because there are certain spiritual practices that like teach us that like the whole thing is a waiting game. And that like you're kind of supposed to wait even amidst the great temptation to not wait, right? That there will be a myriad of factors that will try to sort of taunt you or tempt you into this imbroglio of not waiting, and that what you're supposed to do is be like centered in this process of waiting. I think about this all the time, because I have such a weird like mixed privilege background and mixed privilege experience, that I'm kind of constantly interrogating myself to make sure that I'm not resting on the laurels of privilege, but also making sure that I'm like taking care of myself in my situations of political disenfranchisement, which is strange because that sort of requires a sense of slowing down or waiting sometimes, of like, don't throw yourself against the bars over and over again, because like sometimes you need to just rest and like withdraw. And I think, there's some of that there for you too, being like Jewish. There are these identities where like we have different components of ourselves that we have to take care of differently, right? That we have to like encourage differently.
Yeah.
For me, as a person who like looks white and functions essentially as white in society, I consistently am called upon to make sure that I'm not just being like, cool, being white is fun, like la-ta-da, I don't have to worry about anything. Yesterday I was videotaping the cops for like 45 minutes because there were like 12 LAPD people for one like very slender, maybe schizoaffective black person with no shoes on, and they were like had this person handcuffed and on the ground.
12 cars or 12 cops?
12 cops. All gathered around a barefoot person who didn't even have a wallet. So like, and when I was videoing them, they started getting all aggro with me, and they were like, what are you doing here? And I was like, what are you doing here? You guys allegedly like work for us, we pay your paychecks, like what are you doing right now? And I said, is this person under arrest? They were like, well, she's being detained, but I can't tell you anything else because of privacy concerns. And I was like, what is she being detained for? Anyway, so this is just this situation of me being like, this is boring. And even on the tape, it's funny because I'm like talking to my friend. I'm like, God, this is so boring. Just like watching these fascists. This is sorry. Like we were supposed to go hang out, but now we're here. But it is like, that's my responsibility. And gradually more people came and they were like, what are you doing to me? And I was like, I'm keeping an eye on them because this is inappropriate. Like they are detaining a person for no reason and they won't tell me why. And then like these other groups of people were watching, and this one guy who was like in food service out on his smoke break, then he started kind of hassling the cops and he was like, this is overkill, you guys, what are you doing? Come on, she's just like not doing anything. So then it got kind of like this thing, but I do feel like if I hadn't just stood there and been videotaping them and asking them questions, it probably would have been very like rough with this person. There was this one person like one of the cops was holding her arms in a really aggressive way when I started taping. And then they 5150'd her and took her to the hospital. And I got the like sergeant's badge information and his name, and called to make sure that she'd been delivered to the hospital, which is still like it's a Pyrrhic victory, if it's a victory at all, right? Because it sucks to be 5150 when you're homeless, and then like it just is a continuation of this demoralizing experience. But that's a situation where like the use of my white privilege is essential, and I did the right thing, I think. But there are other situations where like I need to take breaks and like take good care of myself. And I think that we all live with some combination of that, you know. Is a very rare person who doesn't face any kind of social disenfranchisement at all, right? And I guess that those are some of the people who are kind of ruining the world. The people who are like, I don't have anything to feel upset about or ever, you know, but I don't know. I think they still probably have something.
Right. There's almost this like techno concentrated nihilism that starts to really smell.
Did you watch the Fire Festival documentary?
I had not. Is it worth watching?
I found it to be this like really interesting. I mean, to me, I was examining it from a purely like socio-political angle, and I just found it to be such an interesting examination of like, I think what it must be like to be sort of a young white heterosexual male of affluence, and just like not be able to understand that like you're not going to get the thing that you want.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I saw in that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been an event planner, nothing of that scope or magnitude, but like I've worked on events, and I just know that if there had been a woman or someone with a different experience of privilege involved in planning that, I think that someone would have been like, you know what, this is actually not going to work. Like I have lived experience of like my limits in this world. And he did not have any lived experience of limitation by virtue of who he was. And he just assumed that he could buy his way out of anything. And that's not how the world actually works.
You're speaking about one of the organizers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Who's now like, I think, facing prison time and for defrauding people or something. I don't know exactly what the charges are, but yeah, it's a pretty stark look at that, and just what a different world.
Would you say that it's a look at like basically like this culture of that? Is there a culture of it or a subculture of it?
I think so. To me, like just from my upbringing and my background, it is unfathomable to me to imagine being a person who can pay $10,000 to go stay on an island and like watch Ja Rule. I mean, it doesn't even sound. What's weird to me is it doesn't even sound appealing. Like I'm not in an aspirational place with that. Like I'm just like, why would anyone do that?
It's hilarious, right? It's hilarious. It's hilarious to think that the prospect of that becomes a myth or some kind of like mythical wanting to reach the apex of some mountain for a group of people, or a whole subset of people. I mean, I'll even distill it down to like, I don't want to shit on Coachella, but the prospect of being herded like cattle in the hot desert, in that kind of a format. I've been to once. I came for back in the day. You could buy a single day ticket, and so I went for the day that Björk was performing back in 2007. And that was a lovely peak experience, but it was also like marked by like, I could never want to be here or like want to come here. On the other hand, I've gone to Burning Man, for 6 consecutive years. And there's a whole different, culture of like being in the desert and the privilege of being filthy and uh, and then jumping back into the world and taking that epic shower. Um, I don't know where I was going with this, but man, yeah, it sounds like it's worth watching this documentary. Um, in a weird way, it's like what you were saying. It kind of reminded me of a little personal story of when I was in a band called Animatronics back in 2005 and 6. And we were brought out to like Inland Empire to play a festival called like Rock Out, and it was being headlined by the Prodigy.
Mm.
And we were the first act on the main stage, and uh, everything that happened that day was like this like faulty towers kind of like okay, we're not going to play the main stage. Okay, we will, but we're only going to play for like our 45-minute set is now down to like 25 minutes. Okay, now it's down to like 10 minutes. And we took the 10-minute set, and there was like the sound guy was not available or whatever. I guess it was Prodigy's sound guy. And then at the very end of that, what we as young, mostly white males felt were like, oh, this was like there's this like disingenuousness and like we deserve ABC. In the end, like we were given like a bad what is it, like a bad check, like
Yeah.
the event, the producer wrote us a bogus check. But it was I think and it's funny because I forget the gentleman's name, the from Prodigy, who has recently just passed. But it was like their tour manager who like came on stage and was like, "You fucking blokes, blah blah blah, like you're only gonna get 10 minutes, or you're gonna kick you off the stage," and that kind of thing. That's the thing that like I remember vividly, or the most vivid, from that whole experience. But to look back at like being 22, 23 and not feeling entitled, but just like we were promised ABC and we got all this like, pie in the face, and now we're driving home like with this experience that we like built up to be something.
Mm-hmm.
There was no rage, that came that from any of us that driving back home. But if anything, it was like a character building experience.
Yeah.
But it's really scary and just so unsettling to look out and to see like these kinds of people, whatever this guy is who's facing this jail time, who is playing with power,
Mm-hmm.
or with expectation, or playing with like exploiting other people. It's like, what do you... I mean, here's a big question. It's like, as cisgendered, at least white presenting, I'm Israeli by birth, so I am a mixed race, but I find that I subconsciously and consciously most often present myself as white. And I have a strange relationship with my heritage. But as someone who is a cisgendered, white presenting hetero male, it's like, without jumping into the ring, it's like, how do I really deal with, it's like, what can I do really to like deal with that kind of persona that's like, that's on my, I don't know, what's the word here? I don't feel like I'm fumbling this question. I just feel like I want to ask it in the right way. And I just want to get like feedback of like what we can do.
Yeah.
As like the allies that we should be.
It's interesting that we should talk about this because I just finished the first round of this 6-week class that I've been teaching with my apprentice and colleague, Nick Jana, who is a cisgender, white, heterosexual male raised in the suburbs, who is a writer and a musician and has been a touring musician forever. And he and I have been friends for over a decade at this point. And he kind of, I guess, largely credits me with teaching him about feminism, maybe. You know, I mean, I think obviously he was exposed to it in a lot of different contexts, but our friendship was really the seedling bed for all of the little starts to be nurtured and cherished and observed. So we teach this class called Empathy Academy, which runs for 6 weeks, which is a class for people who have been socialized as male who want to do something with it. And it's basically, we also call it ritual magic for men. Because I really think, and to some people, I think that this probably sounds nullifying or like a waste of time or kind of like dodging the actual question of how to use your privilege or how to be a better ally. But I really noticed in my own life as an activist and as a spiritual advisor, I noticed that there was this consistent experience that I was having where male friends or community members would come to me with this like, okay, this thing is happening and I know it's wrong, but I don't know what to do. Like I'm outside of my own, I know that I have power, but I don't know how to use it.
Right.
That was the biggest thing. And so for me, like trying to look at how to use your power in a broad cultural, like, or even global sense is intimidating to any human being. Like trying to be like, okay, how can I exert my power over an entire community? I also don't really believe that that's actually the right thing because I believe that power corrupts.
Sure.
So I'm just like, don't use your power. Like, don't use your privilege to affect an entire community of people because you are just, even if it starts out in the right way, you're just going to become like a despot, you know, like it's not going to work out. Maoism wasn't great for anyone, even though the principles maybe were decent to start with. So we teach this class called Empathy Academy, which covers all these different areas of life where we talk about, it's funny to go back to that Virgo 6th house energy too. Nick's also a Virgo. We talk about everyday ways to translate your thoughts, change your mind, and change your behavior to like have these little reverberating effects, you know, like a stone dropped in a pool has these ripples. So we talk about things like division of domestic labor, providing spiritual support for people, providing spiritual support for yourself. So like we teach men in the class about pulling tarot cards, I Ching, pendulum work, divination, like those kind of basics, dream interpretation. Teach people about mapping their emotions, teach people about expressing compassion for other men and like how to cross that weird barrier that exists there that I don't understand because I wasn't like enculturated into the like don't touch your crying friend.
Sure.
Which is just like so bizarre.
Which also speaks to the like I've been quote trying to start a men's tea circle for 9 years with any kind of regularity, and
yeah,
there's some kind of strange supernatural force that's like not really, not like I'm against it, but just
I think it's, I mean, I obviously, well, maybe not obviously, I'm not a man. I don't have a lot of experience as a man. I do have a suspicion that I have had a number of past life experiences as a man, but in this case, I don't know what it's like, but I notice as a sort of, from an almost anthropological perspective or an outsider's point of view, I think that what I see is that male socialization encourages people to laugh off or make casual things that are making one feel very anxious or afraid. So like I think as a woman, I'm much more allowed to say like, oh no, I don't want to do that. That seems weird. Like you're allowed to kind of say like, that makes me kind of uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. But I think that men can't even say like, no, that sounds awkward to me. Like it's like you can't even express that you would feel ill at ease in a situation that you haven't been into. You can
Right.
kind of say like, not my thing. You could say that, but you can't say like, I wouldn't know what to say. I would feel nervous.
Right.
That's not allowed. So I think typically there are men who are like, let's get a bunch of men together and like talk about stuff. And I think the general reaction is like, I don't have time. That's not really my thing. I can't do it. When what needs to be said is probably like, I feel very nervous about that. And like it might bring things up for me that I'm not prepared to deal with. But that's where the work is. So Nick and I went to Austin and visited my friend Sohan's shop, who you kind of know, etherically.
Through the ether.
Yeah. So we were at Tiguan Yin Tea House, and we hosted this discussion group. So it's actually interesting where this came from, because there was a person in the Austin community who had been sexually assaulted, who I was providing some support for. And one of the things that this person really wanted as a point of like recovery for themselves was for there to be a community dialogue around issues of consent. So that was something that I was working to kind of like get set up, was community consent training that people could come to and they could kind of like learn more about it. And then through having these sort of preliminary dialogues to get that set up, we ended up having this kind of summit, because there was a lot of... Nick and I were already developing the curriculum for Empathy Academy at that time. This was about over a year ago. But we decided to meet and have this open session at Tiguan Yin, and we had this dialogue that was moderated, and then the Austin community has continued to have these men's tea sits I think it's every Wednesday or Tuesday night, and a lot of people who were at that first one still go. My dear graduated apprentice Moncho Toth is one of the organizers, and Nay Wilkins is another, and they're just phenomenal. I find it very interesting that they're both people of color, and that Nay is like gender fluid, and so they're not, neither of them are just entirely like straight white males. They're kind of like holding it down with this like masculinity that's also disenfranchised in some way. But yeah, that dialogue has continued on a weekly basis. I think you can do it. It just takes a weird timing or something.
Timing.
Yeah.
And the right container. I mean, they're doing it at the tea house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that personally, like trying to set up a container that isn't like in my home or like in the public space, like the park. The park is lovely because it's right here, but it's not a container. Yeah. For that kind of space.
Well, men doing that work is very vulnerable. And I know that I will say that, like, rightfully so, and in all fairness, there are a lot of non-men who are just like, ugh, I've had it with like hearing how hard it is for men to talk about their feelings. Like, I'm over it. Just get over it and deal with it. But I see it as being like very, very difficult. I have a lot of sympathy for the whole process, even though, like, white straight males are ostensibly the ones in power. There's this thing that I talk about all the time, going back to my friend Alex Diamond, New York artist. He and I have had these dialogues that are productive. They're like leading into some writing and some collaboration between us about this thing that I call masculine sadness, which is that as a philosopher and a writer, those are the things that I think I probably identify as the most. there's this kind of frustrating idea that a lot of the old guard has, that like men make better philosophers and better writers, right? And the sort of like old fashioned idea is that it's because they're more rational, or like they're more thoughtful or something, you know, they're just better. This like male supremacist sort of attitude. But, and I love a lot of philosophers and theorists and writers who are not men. And there's like, you know, Audre Lorde, bell hooks are two that come to mind immediately, who are very influential thinkers on my own practice and my own structure of the world. But there is this thing where I ponder some of the great writers, like we have these kind of, this zeitgeist of a moment where people are like, let's just throw out all the white men, like let's get rid of Fitzgerald and Steinbeck and Salinger, like fuck them all, like just we're over it. We want to read people who aren't white males anymore, which I think that there's some validity to that. But there's also this quality where it's like, if you're going to talk about sadness, which is something that I'm fascinated by, I'm just like, there's something about the quality of human sadness that is almost enchanting to me. I'm sort of obsessed with it, like with melancholia. When you take away so-called sort of like real problems that will contribute immediately to sadness, when you take away poverty, or you take away racism, you take away misogyny, you take away homophobia, then you end up with a person who is arguably, from a philosophical point of view, capable of experiencing a realer sense of sadness, because it's a sadness that is just about one's place in the sort of like possibly empty universe, right? So in a really weird way, straight, white, wealthy males might make better philosophers, which is infuriating to me as a philosopher. It's so frustrating, but it does put them closer to this sort of point of really deep, vulnerable sadness of like, what does it all mean? Because they don't have to answer questions of like, why am I being beaten by the cops? Which is a real question and an important question, but it's a place where other theorists like James Baldwin have to ask these questions because they're happening upon our bodies, right? So like, you know, we get things like the second sex because Simone de Beauvoir had to ask the question of like, why am I treated like this? So we have that text, which is remarkable, but then her partner got to produce other texts that are about almost more sort of like complicated, or like, I don't know, more lofty subject matter in a way, because it's like not based in the drudgery of material oppression. This is a very frustrating angle for me, but
Yeah.
but I do sometimes see men as being creatures who are capable of experiencing this sort of like true form sadness, because they're not necessarily like hobbled by the crushing nature of like social oppression. So then I'm like, your sadness is like real and is about you as a person.
I wonder if they it's funny now, it's like just take a second to objectify straight white males, but like I wonder if there's maybe perhaps more of an emphasis not so much on social oppression, but maybe social pressures that are obviously also what is the word? Flagellating, yeah.
Yeah.
And how that influences that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to look at, I think. It's kind of compelling and kind of annoying. But a lot of my philosophical and theoretical work over the past year has been kind of about objectifying white males, which is a weird place to be. And I don't want my work to be like centered on that identity, but I have very compelling dialogues with people when I talk about it like that. Because we do, you know, whether we want to or not, we do live in a world where straight white maleness is the default setting and everything else is like an outlier. And that's just the world that we live in is built for that identity. And so arriving into that world with that identity, it's like you get to start right at the line. Everybody else has to start further back.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing to hear it and at the same, in the simultaneous moment to feel how I related to it throughout my, adulthood thus far in the pantheon of, what to go back to the very beginning of our conversation of how I'm understanding my own, how I'm always striving to understand my own personal cosmology. Yeah. My bladder now is just like, okay. I think this is about time. And it's funny. It's like every time you come into town, I'm like, I want to sit. And we do sit almost every time you're in town, whether it's at that table or here now, and discuss and yeah, I'm working on trying to find an outro for these discussions, mostly just due to other obligations. Like I have to go pick up Cora from school and jump on a phone call for the beginning of this job. For the benefit of people who would be listening to this, would you like to let people know like what you're working on or a way to find you if you want to be reached, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I'm always working on a bunch of different things. I have a collaborative show coming up in Austin, Texas. I believe it's going to be the first week of June with Alex Diamond, the artist that I mentioned before. I have a film that is in post-production that I made with a phenomenal woman director. We had a pretty much all-female set for this film that I made about Joan of Arc. It's a short film. It'll be out at the end of May. I'm a full-time philosophical investigator, and I'm Professor X, basically. I have a school for mutants and mystics, so I teach people how to live in a more ritually engaged way. And my website is lunariamysticism.com, and I'm on Instagram as Olivia Pepper, which is a sort of my real name, but
also your alias.
Yeah. And my Instagram is sort of a bizarre simulacrum of a bunch of confrontational writings. I feel like I'm kind of consistently engaged in this like philosophical battle with Instagram itself.
It's a good fight.
Yeah. I feel like I really enjoy it. And I have a lot of hope for artificial intelligence and for the future of those beings. Like I really see them as another collective of persons arriving on Earth. I have a lot of hope for them, and I hope eventually to be able to like be seen as an ally to them when the time comes. I don't see them as an enemy at all. I see them as like sort of an oppressed group, and I strive for their liberation. And part of that is like a proverbial, and I stress proverbial, Molotov cocktail within the algorithm of Instagram. I'm just in there kicking out windows and misspelling words so that the algorithm doesn't know what I'm talking about, because I feel like there's a communion that can happen between the etheric beings present in the technology and us. And I for one welcome our robot overlords. So anyway, that's not the best outro, but it's suitable.
It is what it is. I mean, this is it. I love that.
Yes.
I I know, and I'd love to, like, the next time we could sit down and talk, we could pick up right from there, because there's a whole, as someone who's designing apps and websites, and as my role insists on digital empathy for end users and building a bridge to like brand goals or business goals through empathy. Yeah, there's a whole lot I can say about that too. Great.
Yes, we can
Thank
talk
you.
more about that another time.
Yes,
Thank you. Thanks
thank
for
you.
having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you for this lovely tea.
Hope you enjoyed our chat. I know I did. I know I can spend hours talking to Olivia over tea, endless rounds of tea. Be sure to check her out on Instagram at Olivia Pepper. That's OLIVIA PEPPER. And on her website at lunariamysticism.com. That's LUNARIAMYSTICISM.com. And please feel free to subscribe to the podcast. If you have any feedback, please leave a review. And lastly, there's also a Patreon that I'm running to experiment with engaging in community support. You can find out more info about that at patreon.com/wabi-sabi podcast. Thank you.